Hello world, welcome to yet another episode from NetMadan Tech Academy. Today we are going to make another interesting pie game project. It's going to be Connect 4. Let's get started right away. So we all know the Connect 4 game, how it works. Two players take turns and then the first player to make 4 in a row wins. So let's start by creating a class which will be our base. As always, let's start with the init method. So what we want to do is have our board ready, which will be um, all zeros to start with. So Connect 4 usually has 7 columns and 6 rows. So we can do it like this, or we can keep it more flexible and have the rows and columns being passed along with default values and use those variables here. So that way we will be able to make a Connect 4 game of any size as we want. So the game board is gonna have zeros all along. And let's also have the row and the column as class variables, which will come in handy later. And we also want to keep the win count as a variable. So if it is a bigger board, we can play such a way that we don't only have to connect 4, it can be connect 5 too. So we will make it a variable and accept it in our constructor. So that way our game is really flexible. Okay, the first thing we are gonna, the first method we are gonna write is to print the board. So what we are gonna do here is just simply print the board in a nice way so we can understand what's happening in the game. So we are gonna do a double loop and we are just gonna print what's in the board. So self dot board of the corresponding row and the column, and we don't want any new line after every row, after every column. We only want a new line after every row. So let's quickly test this if it works good. So I'm going to call the class connect 4. That way it's much better. So let's make a variable connect 4 and let's call the print board method and check if everything is working. So what do we have here? We have error in line number 9 where it says for range, you gotta use range because it's an integer. Okay, now it should be better. Let's see. Okay, good. So for row in self dot row, for call in self dot call. So we have used the variables wrong here. So call here, row here. Okay, good. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows and 6 columns. Perfect. And let's quickly see if it works if we pass the rows and columns in. We have to pass win count equal to. Okay, now it should be better. Okay, perfect. That way we can make a connect 4 game of any number of rows, any number of columns, and any number of connections. Awesome. So the next method we are gonna write, the helper method, is going to be to check if somebody has won the game. Okay, let's try that. Maybe before we do that, let's first make the play method where the user can actually place his coins. So we're just gonna call this as make move, let's say, and we want to know the player and the column where he has to drop his coin. The row, we don't need the row because the way the game works is the coin is always dropped from the top and it takes the empty place, the first empty place in that particular column. So we only want to know which column the player is playing at. We will calculate the row. So how are we gonna do that? So let's start with the range. So for mm, range for all the rows, if in the board, let's make this as self.row as well. If for that particular row and that column being passed here, if it is 0, that means it's an empty space. All we have to do is mark that place for our player. Okay, good. So, and let's also return R so we exactly know which row we placed the player at. Otherwise, I'm going to return -1, which will tell the caller that that was not a valid move. Okay, so let's see if this works. For example, in my board, I'm going to call the make move method and I'm going to say for the player X, make a move and place his coin in column 1. And to see if it works, let's print the board again. So what happens in column 1, we see the coin. So perfect. So actually what happened is we are iterating from the top. So we have placed the coin directly at the top, but the coin should have ideally dropped and gone to the bottom. So that means our range should actually work from the back. So since our row always starts from 0, the total number of rows is row -1 as the index starts from 0, and we are going to go till -1. That means we'll stop at 0 and we are going to step by -1. That means we are going in the reverse order. So let's try this one more time. So in column 1, our player went to the bottom. Now let's say if the next player also picks the same column, let's call him the O player, and then he should be dropping his coin up right above the X. Okay, that's working as well. So as I always like to do, I like to clear the previous screen before I print the new board. So that way we only see the latest board. Perfect. That is the latest board. Now we can quickly make this into a game by doing a simple while loop. So while true, let's say the player to go first is X. We have to ask which column. So let's put an input statement and ask which column. And then we will make the move for that player, that column, and then we can switch the player. If player was X, the next turn will be for player O. Else the player will remain X. But we will have to only switch the players if the player actually made a valid move. So we are going to get the feedback from the make move method. So let me just call it as row, in which row, and only if row was not equal to -1, meaning it was a valid move, we'll switch the player. So let's test it now. We have not printed the board, so we gotta print the board, only then we will be able to see what's happening. So let's say let's also say the player. So we will say player plus. So it's player X turn, and let's say he chooses column 1. So his place is here. The next player chooses column 2, 1 again, 2, 1, 2. Now, if I enter column 10, let's say, which doesn't exist, we get a list index out of range because our column does not exist. So we gotta make sure our column is not above. So if call is greater than or even equal to self.call, we have to return -1. So that way I cannot enter a invalid column, and the player also does not get switched because he has not made a valid move yet. I can even choose column 0, which is the first column. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I cannot do 6. I can again start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, everything seems to be working now. So we only need one more method, which is to check when. And all we have to do here is to check a few things. First thing is, did we win by connecting 4 in a row? Did we win by connecting 4 in a column? And did we win by connecting 4 diagonally? And the row could be the move that you made has connected 4 in a row on the left side, or it could be on the right side. And column can be only one way down, so we are fine there. The diagonal could be a forward diagonal or a backslash diagonal. So these are the conditions we need to check. So in order to check win, we want to know what was the last move that was made. So if we exactly know that the last move was in this particular row and in this particular column, all we have to do is check if the last move made a connection that equals the win count. In this case, it is 4. So how are we going to do that? We are going to, let's say, make a count variable, and then we are going to check the row. So across rows, that means our row value will be the same as this one, the last move, but our column should increase. So for C in range, and the count that we are looking for is the win count. So we got to check at least that many columns in that row. And we are going to check left. So that means as you go left, the columns are going to decrease. So we're gonna check if board of this particular row and the current column, if it is equal to, we also want to know who was the last player. So is equal to player, then I'm gonna increase the count by 1. And as we go left, our column is gonna decrease. So we just do minus C. And in the end of the loop, if the count is actually equal to self.win count, that means the player has won. So we're gonna return the player. So this way we have checked the winning condition for the row in the left. And to do the same in the right, all we have to do is increase the column. But when we increase and decrease the column, we have to make sure that we do not step outside the board. So we are going to ensure that by encompassing the whole thing in a try block. So I'm going to put this in a try block, and in the except block, I'm not really concerned about what happens, but I just want to check if the count is good. So let's do the same again. So try to see if you can go 4 columns to the right, and as you go along, check if the same player exists in all the 4 columns. And if the count is equal to the win count, then the player has actually won. Now, following the same logic for the column, that means the row is gonna change and the row is actually gonna increase. That's it. So this way we will check the 4 rows below in the same column. And for diagonal, what is gonna happen here? Here the row is gonna increase and the column is gonna decrease because the column is going left. And for the other diagonal, the row is still gonna increase, but the column is gonna decrease. That way we have checked all the conditions. And if we have reached till this point and we have not returned anything, that means nobody has won. So we are gonna return -1. So now let's see if this works by calling the method c4.checkWin. So c4.checkWin, and we want to pass which row, which column, and which player. And we need to call this before we actually switch the player, because we need to do it for the player who made the last move. So now let's run it and let's say which column. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, at this point, since we are actually doing a clear here, we will not see the output. So let's actually use this to break the loop by checking the winner. And if winner is not equal to -1, then we break. And before we break, let's print the winner. So that way the game will end. But if the winner is -1, then the game continues. So let's try this now. 1, 2. Okay. So at this point, somebody has won. So that's why the game ended. We did not print the latest board. That's why we don't see it. So maybe before printing the winner, we can print the board. So now let's check it one more time. 1, 2, 1, 2. So XS won the game. So now let's try this one more time, but let's check a different condition. 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. Again, XS one row wise. Now let's check the other way. 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2. Okay, XS1 this way. And now let's check one of the diagonals. So let's go 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3. Um, 3. Okay. O goes there. X goes there. O goes there. X goes at fourth column, and then he should win diagonally. Okay, perfect. He has one diagonal. So all our conditions are working. Our class seems to be done. Yeah. Now let's quickly see how we can make a pie game out of this, because right now the game is all good, it's playable, but it's not very user friendly. So let's switch now to a new PyGame replet. All we are going to do now is copy the whole code here and go here, and let's create a new file called connect4.py and enter all our stuff in here. We need everything except the game loop because we are going to make it inside our PyGame. Okay, we probably don't even need the print board game because we'll do our UI here. Okay, so I'm going to start with the base code for PyGame that is generated by Replit. I'm going to just call this variable as window. As always, I'm going to start by fixing the indentation just like this way, and then let's start by window.fill with gray. So let's run it and test. So there you go, we have our window here. Let's start by making the clock. It's always a good practice to have a clock in PyGame. So PyGame dot time dot PyGame dot time dot clock. So then after every update we can do clock dot tick and set our frames per second. I'll go with 60. So now let's start by making our game by importing whatever we have written. So let's import connect 4 and let's make our board connect 4 equal to connect 4 dot connect 4, and let's quickly call the print board method and check everything is working. Good, there we go, we have our board, and we are going to start by drawing the board. So we are going to call this method draw board, and all that we need is the connect 4 variable for this. So how are we gonna draw our board? So we're gonna draw our board by first calculating what is a good height and a width for our board. Let's go with 20. So what we want to do is we want to draw circles on the board to represent the players, and let's go with a radius of 10. And now let's start our loop. So for r in range c4 dot row, and then for c in range c4 dot column. So we have our row and column. So all we have to do is, let's say, draw a rect on our window, and for the color, let's go with black. And for the rect object, we are going to use our cell height times the row that we are in, and we are gonna use the cell width times the column. It will be the width here and then the column on the other side. So only then it will be fine, because we are gonna do the width and the height, and it will be cell width comma cell height. So let's see what we are missing here. Undefined name width. Okay, good. So we are drawing our rectangle here, and let's accept the return rectangle object in a variable, so we can use it to draw the circles to represent the players. So if the C4 dot board of this particular row and this particular column was actually equal to X, that means it's the X player. So what we are going to do is we are going to draw a circle on the surface for a color, let's say blue, and we are going to place it at the center of our rectangle object that we reset. And if the C4 board was the player O, we are again going to draw a circle, but this is going to be red. And we need to specify the radius of our circle. So let's use our radius variable. And all that we have to do now is call the drawboard function. So let's call the drawboard function and pass our game object. So now let's run it and see if it looks good. Perfect. The only trouble is our rectangle is filling the whole space. So let's pass a parameter here, so it is only a border. Good, that looks good. And I can make it even more shorter maybe. So that way it looks more like a play field. Perfect. And now let's test this by passing the row and column. Let's pass more rows, let's say 10, and columns also 10. And let's see if our board looks good. Perfect. And now we want to know if our players are represented properly. So I'm gonna set some player objects just to check if it looks good. So let me put a X player at 0, 0, and let me put a Y player, O player somewhere else to see if the circles show up. Perfect, the circles are showing up. They look good. They are a little bit bigger, so let's reduce them, and that way they are within their boxes. Good, everything looks good for now. our board is being represented properly. Now we just have to find a way to call the move method by reading the column in which the user wants to place their coin. So let's start by coding the type, and let's look for pygame dot mouse button up, let's say, and we want to know exactly which position the mouse was clicked. So we need to find out we only have to find the column. So let's see, even dot pos of 0. Let's first check if it works. So if I click somewhere, it tells me exactly in which column I'm clicking. Good. So what do I have to do to find which column it's being clicked? I just have to know the cell width and cell height. So to do that, our cell width and cell height objects are here. Let's say at this point I return the cell width. So I only need the width. So let me make a variable here, cell width. So now I have the cell width, so I can calculate the column by finding the even dot pos of 0 and dividing it by the cell width, making sure I get only the integer portion of it without the decimal. And now let's print the call and see if everything works good. So if I click here, it should be column 0, column 1, column 2, 3, and now I exactly know in which column the user is clicking. So now I can clearly call the method to make the move, just like how we did in our while loop before. Once we know which column, all that we have to do is make a move and find the winner. So let's do that. So we need to make a move by calling the player. So we need to know who the player is. So we need a player variable. So let's make a player here and start with X. So we pass the player here and we pass which column was clicked, and that way we know the row, and we check the winner. Now let's first check if all of this is working. So now I click here again, I'm able to make moves. We are only seeing blue circles because we are not switching the player. So we need to switch the player. So if make a move, just like how we did here, after checking the winner, we usually switch the player, right? So we need this code. So we can go in here and we can do this. So if row was not equal to 0, then we can switch the player. So now we can see that we are able to click the column anywhere in the column to make the move. Now all we have to do is check the winner. So if winner not equal to -1, that means somebody has actually won. Let's print the winner and see if that works. So now let's see. So X has won through the column. So now let's quickly check other things. Okay, now OS1 through diagonal. Okay, everything seems to be one. We are almost done. The only thing that we could do is we can add a couple of buttons here to clear the board and restart the game, and actually showing who won the game on the PyGame window itself. Those are a few things we can do. We can also play with the cell height and cell width by calculating them based on the size of the window that we are at, by making use of how many columns and how many rows are there actually. But in terms of a basic game, we have achieved everything that we want to achieve. We could, at this point, when we print the winner, we can break the game and we can try um, and show the winner on the screen by creating a font and actually printing on the screen. Those are the few things we can do. The video is already going long, so maybe I'll stop here. The basic game structure is there. Hopefully you all learned something new by making this game from scratch. I will meet you all soon in another video. Until then, take care. Bye, world.